Jon Anik, Fox Sports UFC commentator, is with us now. Jon, how are you, buddy? What's happening?
I'm doing well. Good to be back with you guys. How are you?
All right.
Yeah, good to have you again, John. And obviously the big news is the $4 billion sale of UFC. How is that going to change operations and what's going on behind the scenes and really kind of the promotions? Because it looks like the Fertitta brothers are stepping down.
Yeah, a lot of that remains to be seen. I mean, they will still have a minority stake. They're going to gather the team today in Las Vegas. Unfortunately, I will be on a flight to South Dakota because we've got another live event coming up on Wednesday night. I think for a while it'll be business as usual, especially from my standpoint, live event production. Show must go on. We're doing 42 of these things a year. So I don't think you'll see wholesale changes yet. I think you're going to see a lot of the executives are going to be in place. And as long as UFC President Dana White stays on board, and that is the expectation, I don't think you're going to see too many major changes yet. But as you guys know, you don't spend $4 billion on something to not make changes. So I got to imagine they're going to be bringing in a lot of their own people. Hopefully not new play-by-play guys anytime soon. But, yeah, I think we're all on red alert a little bit and just sort of, waiting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you look at this from a business standpoint because of the size of that package. It just feels like money is going to be flowing into the UFC. Do you think that's going to translate into higher purses for the fighters themselves? Because I just saw, obviously, with Brock Lesnar fighting at $2.5 million, he was the largest purse in the history of UFC by far. Conor McGregor at $1 million at UFC 196 is a distant second. What's going to happen to the purses for the fighters? Or are they going to stay the same?
I think you might see them gradually go up, but one thing that maybe some of your listeners aren't aware of is all these discretionary bonuses that are paid out. Now, in addition to pay-per-view points, and all of the champions, for the most part, get pay-per-view points. So depending on how well the pay-per-view does, a guy like Brock Lesnar, if UFC 200 did 1.2 million pay-per-view buys, he might realize a $7 or $8 million payday. But oftentimes these guys will pay out discretionary bonuses that are never reported to the public, that are separate from pay-per-view points, and sometimes they're 6- and 7-figure bonuses. So I wonder if those will stick around. We obviously have publicly disclosed performance bonuses. I don't know how you really change the salary structure immediately. And one thing that I've grappled with, in a perfect world, the 500th guy on the roster, right, our worst fighter would make at least, 30 or 40 grand a year. But the worst fighter on our roster, what is his value to the UFC? Does he move the needle to any extent to command 30 or 40 G's a year? So, the long-winded answer is I think eventually you're going to see the base salaries go up. But these guys have paid the fighters pretty well. It may not be the percentage of revenue that people would like to see, but these guys have paid fighters very well over the last, 10, 15 years.
Well, the last guy on the roster, he's basically, I don't know, like Salvatore Balamo, whatever that guy's name was, or Frankie Williams, from Columbus, Ohio. I don't know.
It's tricky. It's tricky because, we're doing 42 shows a year, 13 fights a night, and the guys who, come out of the curtain first are on UFCFightPass.com, our digital streaming service. They're not on TV. So I think it's something internally they've grappled with for a long time, and you can be sure the new owners are going to address it, I think, at some point, in the not-too-distant future.
Gotcha. Talking to Jon Anik here, Fox Sports UFC commentator. All right, let's get to the actual card over the weekend. UFC 200, sell out again. No surprise there in Vegas. The hype coming in before the news of Jon Jones was just off the charts, insane. Pretty decent recovery with Anderson Silva, obviously past his prime, but at least name recognition. I understand fundamentally why Danny Cormier was booed roundly by the fans in the arena, but can you be a little more, a little more nerdy in terms of UFC verbiage here? Because I don't agree with the booing, but I'm kind of a new fan, so tell me what I'm missing here.
Well, one thing I would say about the live event audience, it seemed like there were a lot of WWE fans in there, and it wasn't the most knowledgeable UFC crowd that I've been a part of. Actually, it was one of the least knowledgeable crowds, I think, overall. I think you just had a lot of people who don't experience the UFC coming out because of the big 200 show. As far as the fight is concerned, for Daniel Cormier, emotionally, imagine, he waited 18 months for this rematch with Jon Jones. He finds out a few days before that Jones is out, and the guy who steps in is probably the greatest striker of all time. So if you're Daniel Cormier, Olympic wrestler, how do you beat that guy? Do you stand on a napkin in the center of the octagon and trade with him, or do you take him down as a former heavyweight and lean on the former middleweight champion? That's exactly what you do. Now, I think a lot of fans just don't have an appreciation for what Daniel did on the ground, the little movements that, keep your weight heavy and keep Anderson planted. I thought Silva did a good job defensively of evading a lot of those shots, but, this is the recipe for victory for Daniel Cormier. And the thing is, he's the light heavyweight champion, right? So he has to preserve that. He had to get through this spot, make sure his hand was raised by whatever means necessary. So I understand there's a lot of criticism being levied at DC. I think a lot of it has fallen on deaf ears, certainly with the avid UFC fans who know what they actually saw.
All right, so we're on the same page. There we go. It's Jon Anik, UFC commentator, of course, Fox Sports here on Tiki and Tierney.
John, what do we think is the future of John Jones?
Man, I would hate to think that he would never fight in the UFC again, but I think you have to think that's a distinct possibility at this point in time. They have given him so many chances to right the ship. And, again, new ownership could change things, but I think in a lot of respects this could have been a last straw with this group. You build UFC 200 around him, and just the carelessness that he has approached certain situations with is just amazing. And when we talk so much about guys in sports, maybe one of my favorite players of all time, Antoine Walker, blowing $100 million. John Jones is almost the opposite of it. It's untold millions that he's blowing. This might have been a $3 or $4 million payday for him if he's suspended 2 years by the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. This supplement that he ingested waywardly could have been a $15 million swallow, so to speak. So just amazing that he would, as the greatest mixed martial artist that I have ever seen, potentially throw it all away. And he seems to have a pretty good attitude about it a few days removed, but I just, everybody says, he's going to right the ship, and I was in that group. I thought he was going to get his act together, and you can't be too careful in this USADA era with what you put into your body. There was a long list of banned supplements, and the fact that he got popped, it's really disappointing to me, everybody with the company, and I hope to see him fight again, but I'm not holding out hope.
I hear you. All right, John. So Ronda Rousey held the belt through 6 title fights in almost 1,100 consecutive days, and now for the third time in less than 250 days, we have a new women's champ. Nunes, you have some staying power. What do we expect from her?
I think she does. The book on her is that she's an outstanding first-round fighter, and I think if the fight with Miesha Tate was scheduled for 5 minutes instead of 5 rounds, she might have been a 3-1 favorite. She's the better finisher than Miesha Tate. She's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You saw her submit her. She's as lethal a striker as anybody in that division. It's hard to say what her staying power is because a lot of it's matchups, and Holly Holm is fighting on Big Fox July 23rd.
Does she sell? Does she sell? Does she have sellability, if you will? Is she going to really move the needle with the sales?
No, certainly not.
Okay.
Certainly not to the extent to which Holly Holm or Miesha Tate would. I think the good news for Amanda Nunes is that there are 3 other massive names in the division, the former champs Rousey, Holm, and Tate. So, no, she's not going to move the needle. I don't think she's somebody who necessarily could headline a pay-per-view if she didn't have a big name alongside her. But she's an outstanding fighter. She's as exciting to watch as any of those other 3 women. And it's just crazy to think that belt has changed hands 3 times. And for Miesha Tate, Ronda Rousey always said to her, she always said, hey, these other women think they want to be champ, and then they become champ and they don't know what to do with it when it's a whirlwind and you got to go to Australia for appearances and everything that accompanies the champion is a part of it. And I think that was a factor in Miesha Tate relinquishing the title this weekend.
Well, the guy who does move the needle is Brock Lesnar, as evidenced by the conversation we had at the beginning with the $2.5 million payout. What's his future with UFC? Is he going to stay, or it was just kind of a one-off?
I couldn't possibly have more respect for an athlete than I do that man. To not have competed in mixed martial arts for 5 years and to come out and take out the number 8 guy in the world in the manner in which he did, just have a lot of respect for the guy. And his desire to compete is such that itch isn't getting scratched in the WWE. So I would say, at least today here, that I'd be stunned if he doesn't fight in the UFC again. I don't know that he'll ever realize another UFC title shot because I think there are a lot of guys in that top 5. Certainly the champion, Stipe Miocic, Cain Velasquez Jr., Dos Santos. There are a lot of guys in that top 5 that I don't think are favorable matchups for Brock Lesnar at this stage of his career. But, gosh, if he's not just so captivating with everything he does, and it's one thing to come back and want to do that for yourself, to scratch that itch. It's another thing to go out and actually execute the way he did and show off improved footwork and be patient against the most powerful guy in the division. So I'm really excited for Brock. I'm happy for him. And, yes, I absolutely believe he'll be back, maybe even once more before the end of the year.
John, good job laying it out. Well done, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Be good, John.
Yep, Jon Anik, Fox Sports UFC commentator.